Hi, Pete.
Hey, Sharon. How you doing?
Welcome to AI Side Notes. You're my
Awesome.
side note today.
I'll try not to
My
take that
side
personally.
chat, I should say. AI Side Chats. You're my
Cool. It's my
side.
pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So we actually know each other from way back before any of this. Do you remember that? I know you from before.
Yes. We know each other from before the dark times
The before
or the
times.
empire. Yeah, no, good
Yeah.
times. Yeah, it was Scale Media, the digital media days where, everything seemed very possible in terms of like traffic going to infinity and everyone just taking over all these legacy media things with digital properties. And I don't
Right.
think that happened all that
How
much.
how the tide has turned again.
Yeah.
Well, I remember when you launched Media Copilot. So I think this was sometime in 2023. It was after ChatGPT and all the others first came out with their initial offerings. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. So it was about a year roughly after ChatGPT first landed in like late 2022. So I was working at CoinDesk when that happened. I was the chief of staff there. So and that meant I was in charge of content strategy. So when that happened and everyone was writing their think pieces about, ChatGPT wrote this article and whatever, I definitely could sort of feel like, oh, wow, this is like, has a lot of potential to change the media. And we sort of rapidly threw together some guidelines. Like I put together the committee. We wrote some guidelines for the site. They're still there. I wrote them. And we did prototype some use cases. So after I'd left CoinDesk, I knew I kind of wanted to do more of that, like the intersection of AI and media, which I found just really fascinating. I've been a tech journalist my whole career. So that idea of like applying AI to this kind of like knowledge work, was just extremely fascinating. And so basically gave myself a job by launching the newsletter, which became a podcast, which also became a kind of an AI education consultancy for journalists and PR professionals.
It's really amazing because my memory is that you were very early. Like after you kind of jumped in, there were others that followed you, but you seemed very early to realizing that everything was going to change and people were going to need a lot of advice.
Yeah.
What was your initial feedback to what you were doing, and how have things evolved? I know that's a big question, but in a nutshell, how are things going?
So when I first launched, I was obviously very nervous. I'd never done anything like that before. I honestly, you have a lot of imposter syndrome when you do something like this, and you're like, "Oh, do I even have anything to say?" Blah blah blah. And I got over that pretty quickly because I, with all the people sort of coming to me afterward, like subscribing and reaching out, it was so clear everyone was still figuring this out. I kind of knew that, but it was good to get that validation. And so it was nice. I've been fortunate in my career to know a number of sort of prominent people in media companies. They helped me with like a signal boost when I came out, so that was really nice. How it's going, it's fine. You could always be doing better. I think because there's so much to still be done in this space, and as kind of a first time entrepreneur, you kind of see a lot of opportunity in such a like AI just progresses so quickly. So many people need either advice, training, consultations. You want to do it all. Like so, and that's if there's I've had a problem, it's just been that. There's just so much opportunity, it's hard to prioritize.
Well, it's
Um,
interesting because I feel like the tech folks would call that like a green field, like it was sort of wide open. And as things continue to evolve, it's even more so in a way.
yeah, and to your point, a lot of people jumped in, and not just like solopreneurs and smaller outlets, like big companies are doing AI training or consulting. Certainly, that's all happening. But I do have that advantage of kind of being early. Like I've been paying attention to it since even before ChatGPT as a tech journalist. But you mentioned sort of it. I was early. It didn't feel like I was early at the time. It felt like I was like a few months behind at least. But now I sort of look back at everyone who sort of jumped in and all the attention that's being paid now to a lot of the things I've been writing about for 2 years. And oh yeah, I was. so because of that, I've sort of earned a little bit of sort of extra cred from just having done it for a while. And because I'm so narrowly focused, like I cover AI with respect to how it's changing media, and also how like media professionals, both PR and journalists, can use it, right? It's not like I don't have anything to offer people outside of that focus, but it is like picking your niche was crucial.
Well, one thing I remember too, and I don't know whether you saw this that way, but I feel like in the beginning, when ChatGPT first came out, there was, maybe it was just like a fingernails hanging on for dear life kind of feeling, but a lot of journalists seem to feel like this isn't going to happen. Like, this isn't, I don't really have to worry about this. Not real journalists. Real journalists don't have to worry about this. And I feel like that changed pretty quickly. And now I feel like it's fully changed. Like everyone knows, everyone's using the tools. It took a long time for some people to even be willing to use the tools, I think. I mean, I was, obviously, because I cover AI, but for other journalists, I think it took a little time to even be willing. Did you feel that way, or were people
for
more?
Sure.
Yeah.
There's still a certain amount of skepticism, and justified skepticism, certainly, of AI. I mean, it's not a flawless tool, as everyone knows, but it's obviously a very helpful utility and tool, or people soon just wouldn't use it. And to your point, I think journalists are all using it now. So, and if you think about like Google and Google AI overviews, it's almost hard not to use AI at this point. But I think the sort of phenomenon you're describing, like the slow warming up to it, that certainly happened, and some of that's been reluctant. But I find that when you when a journalist looks at their process and looks at the things they don't like to do, like I've run newsrooms, I've led teams, I've obviously been a journalist. I don't know really anyone who really loves the idea that you also sort of became a content marketer somewhere in the 2010s, and you had to write all your own tweets and your SEO headlines, and everyone sort of became part of the job, and everyone kind of does it. But it's really kind of a good job for AI, and it's actually very good at doing that kind of thing. And when you sort of show people, hey, it can do this for you and take away this thing you didn't need to do anymore, and you don't need to do anymore, then that's a good sort of first step on like, okay, I guess it can do something. And then on the other side, there's the research, story ideation, which probably came a little later for a lot of folks. But then I think now a lot of folks are very comfortable just using it as a research buddy for things you're not going to publish, right? So it's really like those two ends of the process that had really, like the story generation process, that have really, like, I think, brought a lot of people on board. And certainly there's some of that's been top down. Like if your newsroom is building tools for those things and they're offering them to you, there's silly not to use it. It's when it sort of AI gets in that middle part, right? Like the story writing creation process, that's where things get dicey for everyone. Obviously there's a lot of people who are very philosophically opposed to that. Again, very understandably so. But there are some aren't, and we'll see to some degree how much AI gets into that process in the long term. But I do think broadly, like the AI presence, just to sort of reverse the lens on this, which is the AI presence in the information ecosystem, is ultimately like the thing a lot of people are wary of, because it's that whole disintermediation effect, right? Like you put a story out there, it's summarized by AI. Now no one, well, one, my whoever I work for isn't getting traffic, which affects you existentially as your job, but also people just aren't coming to your work, right? And you have this sort of proprietary, and again, understandable reaction. Like what's up with that? Someone just this robot just summarized my work and took away some chance for me to connect with an audience member. It's very profound, and how we deal with that going forward with regard to obviously the business agreements, but also just the quality of the information, how you present it. That's something obviously we're all still thinking through. And
that's what I want to ask you. I do feel like for me, for a lot of people I know, it's sort of this weird combination of real practical use cases that you wrote a blog post, I think the other day about like 10 ways you use AI for your journalism. And they were all great. Some I do myself. So, a couple were like, good to point out. But then there are so many like more existential philosophical things. I don't know if you saw this New York Times piece just the other day. Maybe it was even yesterday. It was about why does AI write like that? It's this really deep dive that goes beyond just, M dashes and the word delve. It gets into all these deep, like he really has researched and used himself all the ways that the AI does kind of weird writing things and has its own cadence. And are we all going to start writing like that? What is your philosophy? Like not just your business advice to people, but philosophically, how do you feel about all this?
A couple of different things to consider as I've sort of thought out my approach and again, the philosophical stance I have on it. So one is approaching this with some humility, which I think is can be difficult, but the idea that, as a writer, as a journalist, like my stance or my approach is going to sort of determine what people do or whatever. I mean, it's a bit silly, right? Like ultimately, like I think in a lot of these things that have to do where your work intersects like distribution in the ecosystem, the audience it's up to the audience. Like if the audience thinks something is worthwhile and is valuable to them, they're gonna use it. So if they find an AI summary helpful, and a lot of people do, that's just how people are going to consume stuff. So you've got to like that's sort of the starting point. Like, well, you've got to adapt to this reality. It doesn't mean you got to like agree to everything AI does and be happy about it and acquiesce to big tech companies. Not at all. But you do have to acknowledge that it's a lot of this isn't up to you. Like in terms of what happens. That said, the approach of using AI in any process, you really kind of have to think about like where your judgment really is needed, and this sort of another sort of layer to the humility of like, if your job has kind of mostly been doing sort of very straightforward kind of roundup stuff, like was for clicks, right? Like, we all did this stuff in the click era. A lot of people are reacting on Twitter to this thing. Here's some tweets. That just come on. Like, I mean, the bots can write that, like, I don't think anyone loved writing that stuff, but it was like part of this functional thing. So in that way, project that out. And again, obviously I singled out one single kind of content, but this applies to a lot of like, not quite clickbaity, but not quite, the deep journalism we actually signed up for content. I think AI has a potential to be a very positive force in altering those incentives. Now, again, this largely depends on what AI is highlighting and how work sort of manifests in there, either summarized or clicked through. So it sort of assumes if AI is done right and has been designed to bring good content to people, which I don't know why you wouldn't design it that way. So, I mean, I guess there are reasons, but like generally that's what it should do. It's going to hopefully favor valuable content that fuels it. Now, again, we got to figure out the business model. Should it be licensing? Should it be pay to click, et cetera, or pay for inference? But that I find it. I'm still optimistic that that's going to happen. That these incentives are altering from what we saw in sort of the algorithm search social era, where honestly, it was kind of a race to the bottom and the clickbait and outrage and all the things, right? Like it just, it was, certainly like it's not saying all journalism went to crap. A lot of great work was done during that era, but also there was a lot of functional clickbaity stuff.
There's still that like on Google Discover and everything.
Totally. I mean, the thing is that hasn't gone away. I hope there isn't like an AI equivalent of that. Like, again, this presupposes a good faith design of AI that looks to weed that stuff out. And that, again, it's sadly not up to us as content creators. That's going to be up to like what the audience responds to, and if the tech companies who are designing this stuff index for that, right? Like we saw them all index for some probably not so great signals for a long time. Again, still are to some extent. The engagement mining that continues to be a problem. But I think I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic that AI can sort of steer us on at least somewhat better course. And I guess it's kind of like, then what is the cost of that? And I don't have all the answers to that. I do think this naturally sort of has a natural selection process that's going to lead to, at least in the short term, kind of a smaller overall industry in some ways. You just don't need as many people doing content because a lot of these sort of like functional content is either accelerated by AI or you just don't need it anymore. The value's gone to zero. But it does reward people who do like really, like yourself, who do really great journalism, call sources, like really provide those fundamental building blocks that are still desperately needed, because that's the stuff we all wanted. We didn't want all the culture coverage. Like we want the meat. I mean, generally.
For like my last main question, I wanted to ask you not about the business model, but kind of the idea of how we're struggling to trust what we think of as real or not real. And again, that can be argued at this point because it can be very nuanced depending on how you're using AI for your work. But just two examples. So if I'm looking at a Substack, a pretty technical Substack, I'm noticing that they're posting 3 to 5 times a week, pretty long posts, and they're quite technical. I know that there's not a chance that they're writing it on their own, because I would not be able to come up with that, pace of content myself. It would be impossible. But on the other hand, I don't care as much because the output is still good. Like I'm getting the information I want, and it's not really calling sources. It's like an analysis. On the other hand, I had this interesting Substack thread last week with a memoir writer who has a Substack, and she kind of called out a modern love essay in the New York Times, saying that it was definitely AI generated. And I read the modern love essay, and modern love is pretty beloved amongst essay writers and hard to get into and everything. And I saw what she meant, but I felt like, wow, like I would never accuse New York Times editors of letting that go. And who knows why it seems like that. And I felt like it was on the edge. It wasn't like I wasn't sure, but it made me feel bad that I even had to question modern love.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. When you were starting to ask about what's real and what's not, I thought you might have gone to the imagery side of things, which is probably an easier answer. You know what I mean? Like what you're getting at is a whole, now it's almost like the other side of the liar's dividend. You know what I mean? Like you can always, the liar's dividend is you point at something and just accuse it of being AI and tapping onto people's suspicion. But what you're getting at is like that suspicion is justified, right? Like now everyone sort of has this, is it AI layer on everything we're looking at. And I don't see that necessarily getting better in the like we're always going to kind of need that. But I also think if to approach it from an agnostic standpoint, like your point about the Substack, where it's probably AI boosted at the very least, but if the content's valuable, what does it matter? And I think that's going to take a while. All the conversations I have with anyone and normies, so to speak, there's still the understandable knee jerk. Oh, it's AI. Like I get it, and it's sort of associated with poor quality. But the more people can find use cases where it enhances, speeds up, generally makes better in some way what you're presenting, I think that will slowly not fade, but sort of adapt. People will sort of get more sophisticated and like, oh, yeah, this was AI, but it's actually either, well, probably a couple things based on really good content, given a lot of human in the loop enhancement and vetting, and then presented in a thoughtful way. Like if all of that is taken into account, then sure, like great, it's AI, but I still like it. Good example, honestly, very recently, those infographics that Nano Banana can do.
Yes.
Wow, like they're pretty impressive. I as an educator, right? So I've started showing these in my courses, and they blow people away. Like it's just like all the words are perfect, and it makes sense, and with minimal prompting, like anyone can create these things. And it's AI, but it's like, oh, the quality is actually not bad. So in other words, like a lot of the context around it. But again, I think that's gonna take a while. And to get to the sort of main point of that unreality layer, I think it's hopefully just going to get a bit more sophisticated. Like sort of people will start to differentiate between sort of bad use of AI and good use of AI.
Yeah, so there'll be AI slop, but there'll also be AI, I don't know, diamonds or something.
Yeah, and the slop is hopefully it's already kind of getting weeded out. I think people like, I mean, obviously it exists, right? There's all tons of AI content out there, but in terms of is it getting through filters, right? I think it's less and less getting through the filters. So I'm optimistic about slop, but again, you kind of have to define slop. And some people define slop as all AI content, right? Or
Exactly.
And some people like I obviously think we need more nuanced definition of it. And I'd probably land more on the liberal side of like, well, like I say, I'm agnostic about the author mostly, but while acknowledging all slop, like low value content is created by AI. You have to balance those two realities. You can't just say like, oh, I'm completely going to come into this AI thing neutrally. Well, might be a good chance it's slop. So you need to sort of turn on your skepticism.
Well, Pete, thank you so much. Thanks for doing an AI side chat with me.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay.